Book 4, Chapter 4. The Mask of Horror. The chamber the kobolds had given them was small, low-ceilinged, and smelled faintly of dragon. It wasn't a strong smell, but it lingered, like the ghost of incense in a room where a fire had died hours ago. Zira had felt it against her skin all night, a prickling sensation that kept her from closing her eyes. She had sat with her back to the others, arms locked around her knees, and watched the candle burn itself down to a stub. Her thoughts had been a procession of small horrors, the warmth of Meepo's hand at her arm, the sniff at her thigh, the words, "dragon blood important," still rolling somewhere at the back of her skull, and she had let them pass one after another without flinching. By the deepest part of the night she had stopped asking sleep to come. When the first of the others stirred, she rose. She moved with a stiff, deliberate grace, as if rising from a long dinner. She unfolded her travel pack with slow, methodical care, and took out the only dress she had brought with her into the cave, dark midnight wool, severely cut, the cuffs and the throat embroidered with a thin braid of red silk lace. Just yesterday, standing over the open lid of the chest with her hand passing over the wool of half a dozen other dresses, she had picked this one and only this one, and laid it in her pack, and not asked herself why. She fastened the buttons one by one, finding a strange, quiet comfort in the trivial task. She was meeting a dragon today, and she had dressed for the occasion. She would offer the dragon the courtesies she had been raised with, regardless of whether the beast understood them. Across the room, Karma woke as he always did, instantly, fully, as if pulling himself from cold water. For a second, his mind scrambled to place where he was. Then his gaze fell on Zira's straight back and the flash of red lace at her sleeve. That red lace was a tether, yanking the nightmare he had just escaped back to him with brutal clarity. He had been in high hold, holding Angela, her black dress, the red ribbon in her hair, the small laugh against his neck. But then her eyes turned a slow, viscous yellow, and her teeth lengthened into rows of jagged glass. Her skin began to warp into black enameled scales, and the air grew thick with the scent of ozone and caustic acid. And as he stumbled away from the monstrosity, he saw Zira in the empty courtyard, weeping, her hand outstretched, red scales catching the light along the uncovered curve of her shoulder, her ribs, her hip. "Help me," she said. But when he took the first step, she began to laugh. She raised her hands toward Karma, and then the fire consumed him, and he woke. His gaze stayed on Zira a moment longer than he meant. When he finally looked away, he set himself not to look again. The discipline he held over himself felt fragile, and he knew the morning would test it. Balin, on the floor by the wall, broke off a corner of travel bread, chewed it, and washed it down with a long pull of water. His eye flickered briefly to Karma's face, and then back to the bread.
"Right,"
Balin said.
"If any of you start prophesying in your sleep, could you do it quietly? I asked for peace 8 hours ago. I'd hoped it might last until dawn."
Doreen, braiding her hair while she finished her breakfast, snorted.
I heard him at it too. Paladin muttering. Urgent and incomprehensible, just like when he's awake.
She had heard him perfectly well. She had heard him say Angela, twice. She had heard him say high hold, and once, lower than the rest, almost whispering, she had heard him say Zira. She had folded these names into the small private pocket at the back of her mind, where she kept things that might one day be useful.
You looked half dead before you sat up.
She added, sliding a look at Karma.
Quite a night for the strong, silent type.
Doreen, stop it.
Karma snapped.
Oh, fine. Boring topic anyway.
She waved a hand.
Items of note for the morning. Item the first. The dwarf still snores.
"I do not snore."
Balin grumbled into his bread.
You do. You snore like you're arguing with a wagon wheel that's lost its bolt. The kobolds 3 corridors over know it.
That is not the same thing as snoring.
It is exactly the same thing as snoring.
You will share less of all of it.
Karma said, his voice flat.
As his lordship commands.
Doreen stood, pulling her braid tight.
Speaking of which, we have a catatonic elf in the corner. Ilara, sweetheart. Up. We've a goblin to gut and a dragon to fetch.
She walked to the corner. Ilara sat cross-legged, his hands resting palm up on his thighs, his eyes wide and seeing nothing. Doreen waved her hand in front of his face, then pinched his earlobe between her fingers. Nothing.
Right.
Doreen muttered. There was a knocking that was less a knock than a polite scratching. Meepo poked his head into the room. His small, bright eyes scanned the 4 of them before landing on Zira.
Ready?
Meepo asked, his voice thin and eager.
Kill goblins? Return cowcricks?
We are ready.
Karma said. He was already on his feet, shield buckled, talons pommel a familiar cold weight against his thigh.
Lead the way.
Follow me!
Meepo agreed. Then he hesitated, looked at Delara, and visibly decided not to inquire. He turned and trotted into the corridor with the bright, matter-of-fact briskness of a host who has at last got his guests moving. They followed Meepo out one by one. Balin took the lead, his glaive resting over his shoulder.
I'll go in front,
He said, not entirely to anyone.
Saves the rest of you from learning anything you'd regret.
You should always take the front, dwarf.
Doreen said behind him.
I wish you had done that yesterday when I fell on that centipede. You could have taught us some dwarven techniques.
I only go first when there is a real danger.
Doreen filed out after him, followed by Karma. Zyra paused at the doorway. As Karma came level with her, she reached out, hovering her hand just short of his arm. She hadn't touched anyone in days, and stopped him.
Karma.
He paused. He had set himself, less than an hour ago, not to look. He looked. The red lace lay against her skin in the dim light, close to him in the narrow corridor. Too close.
Miss Darkmeyer.
The dragon.
Zyra said. She kept her voice very even. It took effort, and the effort showed only in the slight stiffness of her jaw.
If we can avoid harming it, if there is any way to speak with it first, I would ask that we try.
Karma was silent. She had braced herself for refusal. What he gave her was not refusal. What it was, she had no idea.
Let's see how the situation develops.
He said. Then he stepped past her and into the corridor. Zyra clenched her hand into a fist, let out a slow, sharp breath, and followed. Meepo led them through passages where the ceilings sometimes soared into darkness, and sometimes dipped so low Balin had to stoop. The walls were carved with ancient devotion to dragons. Coiled scales chased one another along the corners, and eyes the size of plates peered from faded reliefs above the lintels. They crossed a hall featuring a dry stone fountain shaped like an open dragon's mouth. The basin stained a sickly pale green from long evaporated water. At the end of the hall, a door bore an inscription carved deep into the stone.
Rebuke the dead.
Zyra read, then stopped.
Open the way.
Doreen tilted her head at the door.
Cheerful lot, weren't they?
Not our concern.
Karma said, brushing past it without a glance. He didn't slow. He didn't care about the text. His entire focus was a narrow, grinding discipline. Since the courtroom of the Kobold King, his mind had been a locked room. If I die here, it will be a relief, he thought, though he kept the words buried. To speak them would dishonor Hor, who had demanded this trial. Talon at his belt was his daily ledger of debt. He would not fail that debt by falling on a dungeon floor. So he walked. The walking was the discipline. Behind the discipline lived a black dress with a red lace, and behind that there were scales.
Karma, slow down a moment.
Doreen called out after another turn.
Keep moving.
He commanded.
Right. Talk to a wall, get a wall's answer.
she said, and quickened her step. She came up alongside him at the next door and put her hand flat against the wood before he could.
Hold!
Karma stopped. Slowly and with no expression, he turned his face down to her.
Miss Doreen.
Miss Doreen? That's a new one. I'll think about whether I like it.
Doreen did not move her hand.
You're walking through every door you find without checking it for traps. You're on a death march. Zyra hasn't blinked in an hour, and the elf is back there having a tea party with his own brain.
Move your hand.
In a moment.
She did not move it.
From here on, no door opens until I've opened it. I have a little spell for that, and from now on I will use it, yes?
Karma's jaw worked once.
Fine.
Wonderful. And one more thing.
She lifted her chin to Zira.
That silver aura of yours. Do it to me. I'd rather not depend on the paladin's mood for our hides today.
Zira studied her for a moment. Then a thin, genuine smile touched her lips. She murmured a few syllables, and a soft silver light flickered over Doreen's clothes before sinking into the fabric.
And you.
Doreen said, turning to Karma.
You're charging into the dark like a blind bull. No more.
She gestured toward his shield, and a sharp white glow settled along its rim. Balin, at the rear, watched all this in silence.
Well,
He said finally.
that's a turn-up. The little sister runs the war now.
Only till the rest of you remember how.
Doreen muttered. She stepped back from the door, made a tiny gesture with 2 fingers, and the bolt slid back of its own accord. And somewhere far in the walls, an iron bell began to ring. The bell tolled twice, then settled into a steady, frantic alarm. Karma was already moving. He shoved through the door, finding a barricade of crates and broken benches 20 paces ahead. 2 goblin heads popped up, screaming. He charged. He had taken 3 full strides when his foot came down on something that turned sharp under his boot, and a second something punched through the leather and into the meat of his arch. He did not slow. Hor's debt was not paid by slowing, but the next stride was wrong, and the next was slower. And before he reached the barricade, the goblins loosed their first arrows. One skipped off his shield, and another buried itself in the wall behind him.
Caltrops.
He said. Behind him, Zyra stepped back out of the corridor doorway, crossed the room, and pulled shut the other door, the one through which they had come.
I don't want us to be flanked.
She said, sharp, to no one. It was not a debate. Balin followed Karma into the corridor, glanced once at the caltrops, and picked his way through them with a smith's precision. He passed Karma and reached the barricade first. When the first goblin showed his face above the crates, Balin's blade flashed up, caught him under the jaw, and dragged him down, screaming. Doreen, against the wall opposite to Zira, drew, sighted, and put her arrow into the second goblin's throat. It too fell. There was, very briefly, only the sound of the alarm bell. Zyra, eyes very wide, breath very fast, pushed away from the door and was about to move forward to join the others when the door at her back suddenly opened. Zyra gasped, spinning around. In the doorway, backlit by the encroaching shadows of the chamber, stood a tall, skeletal figure with an engraved sword in each hand. His tattered black clothes hung loose from him, and his skin, where the pale light touched it, looked grave cold. The smell of death came with him. For a sickening instant, Zira saw only an undead thing, a corpse dragged out of the shadows and armed with blades. She screamed, a thin, contained sound like a child cornered by a dog. Her legs gave out and she collapsed, scrambling backward until her shoulders hit the corner. Her hands flew up to protect her face, the heat in the air around them vanishing into cold, useless ash. Doreen whipped around.
Zyra, what is it?
The figure stepped forward into the white light of Karma's shield. It was Alara. Of course it was Alara. He stood there in his travel coat, both swords drawn, head tilted just slightly as he surveyed the scene. The corridor, the bodies, the glowing shield, and Zira cowering in the corner. Zyra's breath came back in a jagged rush.
Eli, are you hurt?
Ilara asked, his voice soft, drifting between his own and something hollow. Zyra couldn't find her voice. She shook her head. Ilara watched her a second longer, then turned and began walking with that unhurried, stalking grace toward the fight. 2 steps in, he hit a caltrop. He stopped, looking down at his boot with a deeply, patiently aggrieved expression, and began plucking the metal stars from his sole. Doreen shot a quick, sharp look at Zira.
You all right?
Zyra nodded, though she was anything but. By then, Karma had climbed the first barricade and seen what was around the bend. A second wall, taller, better built. Behind it, more goblins than he could count in the half-second before the air filled with arrows. Most struck his shield. One hit his breastplate at the collarbone and snapped on the steel. One found the gap between gorget and pauldron and went in, deep, and stayed there. The world tilted. He stepped backwards around the corner, his free hand at his neck, blood already coming hot and fast through his fingers, and put his back against the wall. His vision dimmed at the edges. The bell was still ringing somewhere, he thought with cold clarity. Not yet, not paid yet, and shaped Hoar's name silently with his bloodied lips. Warmth moved through him. The flow at his neck slowed. His vision returned. The arrow was still in him. He left it. He pushed off the wall. Doreen was also moving. She vaulted the first barricade sideways and rolled into a somersault around the bend, coming up on one knee with an arrow already at her cheek. The bow sang twice in a sound that was almost a single sound, and before the second arrow had reached its mark, Doreen was already gone. Up, sideways, into cover. Behind the second barricade, a goblin took both arrows, forehead, then chest, and fell with a single sharp cry.
Whore avenges.
Karma said aloud, quietly, like a man closing a ledger, and stepped back around the corner with his shield up and talon out. The shield of faith was a pale haze along the edges of his armor. He went forward. He did not run. Running was for those who feared the day's end. Balin came up behind him, glaive over his shoulder, and matched his pace.
Oh, good,
Balin muttered.
We're doing the slow march. I love the slow march.
Behind them, Zira pulled herself up from the wall. The fight had moved on, but as she moved to follow, Ilara suddenly stepped into the doorway, blocking her path, and slammed the door shut, locking them in. He stood with his back to the closed door and a sword in either hand, the blades held low and easy at his sides, eyes on Zira's face with the strange flat patience of a person watching a candle that might or might not gutter out. He took a step forward.
We're safe here.
Ilara, we cannot hide in here.
Ilara took another step. The expression on his face did not change. The blades did not rise, they did not need to.
You're safe here, Eli.
Ilara, please. The others need help. We have to go.
Ilara tilted his head. The motion was slow, considered, as if he were trying to translate the sounds Zira had made into something he could understand. The doll, in the inner pocket of his coat, remained silent. Nothing in this room moved except Ilara's slow tilting head and the small, unsteady rise and fall of Zira's chest.
Eli,
Ilara said.
the others are loud.
Open the door.
You always run toward the loud thing. You shouldn't. They shouldn't get to have you, not them.
Ilara, please. Open it.
Ilara studied her a moment longer. Then he nodded, slowly, with the gravity of someone agreeing to a difficult and somewhat distasteful thing, and said very quietly,
You are not allowed to die yet. I will kill them for you.
He turned, swung the door open, and vanished down the corridor at a smooth, terrifying run. Zyra stood alone, hands pressed to her ribs, feeling her heart hammer against her dress. She drew one shaking breath, then another, and forced her legs to follow him into the dark. The fight at the second barricade had become a stalemate of attrition. Two goblins had positioned themselves where Doreen could not get a clear arrow without crossing in front of Balin's glaive, and where Balin's glaive could not reach over the lip of their cover. They had cut Karma. They had been cutting him in small economical strokes, one and then another, for what Karma's blood-light skull was telling him had been an hour, though it had been less than a minute. He had a slash along the underside of his sword arm. He had a slash above his knee. He was bleeding from somewhere behind his ear that he could not see and would not waste time looking for. He was still standing because Hor demands it. Zira came around the corner with Alara a half-step ahead of her, and for one breath relief struck her hard. Karma, Balin, Doreen, alive, armed, fighting. The corridor was chaos around them, steel ringing against steel, voices breaking into shouts, but they were here. Her friends were here. Tell someone what happened with Alara. Then her eye moved from face to face, and the relief thinned. Karma would hear it as manipulation, the dragon blood whispering against the broken elf. Balin had never trusted her. Doreen would believe her, perhaps, but Doreen would solve it the only way Doreen ever solved anything, and that solution would not leave room for the promise Zira had given Morthal. None of them. There was no one she could tell. She raised her hand. A bolt of fire crossed the corridor and burst against a goblin's chest, and the goblin fell back with its tunic burning. Alara charged and, in one long leap, landed next to the last remaining goblin, his swords already moving. A strike to one side, a strike to the other, then a flicker of loosened fingers that let one blade wheel through the air and settle reverse-gripped just in time to be punched under a goblin's ribs. The barricade was cleared, but the door at the far end of the corridor opened. 3 more goblins came through it at speed. Karma, on the higher side of the barricade, was struggling for his footing when he saw Zira come up beside him on the obstacle's lip. He turned his head and looked down at her. Her eyes were red. Not entirely, not the whole of them. The whites were still white, but around the iris, where the ordinary brown and gold of her eyes ought to have been, a fine, bright, copper-red light had gathered, and it was bleeding into the black of the pupil. Her face was set. She lifted both hands, palms open, fingers slightly spread, and the air around them went hot and dry, and the air poured out of her in a wave of red light and rolling fire that swept down the corridor and folded around the 3 goblins who had come through the door. 3 small black silhouettes in the center of a living flame. Karma saw the dream. He saw it exactly. Zira reaching out her hand, Zira unleashing fire, the living flame, the fire from her, the fire of her, and the dragon behind it that was her. He stumbled. His foot missed the wood of the barricade, and he fell, his shoulder hitting the stone hard. His helmet clattered against the floor, the strap snapping, the iron mask of Hor sliding away into the dust. The 3 goblins staggered out of the flames, singed and reeling. They stopped, staring down at the man who had been the masked paladin. Balin came down off the barricade in a single hop that for a man of his weight ought to have shaken the floor, and it did. Balin's glaive came down and smashed the goblin to the ground. The second came at him with a knife. Balin took the knife on his armor and the goblin on his glaive, and that was the end of the second one. The third turned, perhaps to flee, but Doreen's arrow took it in the back of the neck, and the corridor was quiet. The bell, somewhere in the deep walls, was still ringing. Karma did not move at once. He lay on his back beside the lip of the barricade and looked at the ceiling, and for a long second the ceiling was enough. Then his hand closed around the strap of the mask, and he sat up, and he tied the mask back over his face with hands that were briefly clumsy, and he stood. Balin was looking at him.
Aye,
Balin said.
up you get then.
Karma turned his head. The mask hid most of his expression as it was meant to. What it did not hide was a small, clean tightening at the corner of his mouth.
Thank you.
He said. Balin grunted. He bent, planted the haft of the glaive between his boots, and used it to lever himself into a more comfortable stance.
Don't thank me. Thank the dwarf who taught me to come down on a goblin with my full weight. It's a fine technique. I'll show you sometime when I'm drunk.
I shall consider it a sacred lesson.
Karma drew breath, set his hand against his own neck where the arrow had gone in, and called Hor's healing into himself once more. The flesh closed, the blood crusted. He stood straighter. Doreen was already kneeling at the second barricade, methodical, going through pouches.
3 coppers, 1 bent dagger, 1 rotten apple. Honestly, goblin economics.
She glanced up, then more gently than she might have a year ago.
Zyra, you whole?
Zira stood still, arms wrapped around her ribs as if warding off a chill. She was staring down the corridor, past the bodies and the barricade, toward a third door at the far end of the room. She did not answer Doreen. She was, for the first time in days, not afraid. It was something else. There was a vibration low in her ribs, in her hips, in the small of her back where the scales lay. It was like music, like a low, slow chord struck in a cathedral on the other side of a wall. She could not hear it. She could feel it.
Karma,
Zyra said. Her voice was soft and very clear.
that is where we have to go.
Karma followed her gaze. He did not speak at once. Behind the mask his face had gone, very briefly. Still,
Miss Darkmeyer.
he said.
That is where we have to go.
He did not argue. They came together to the third door. Doreen lifted her hand in habit. Let me check it. And Zyra shook her head once.
It is open.
Zira said. She did not know how she knew. Karma set his shield. He looked at Balin. Balin nodded. He looked at Doreen. Doreen pulled an arrow from her quiver and set it loose against the string. He did not look at Alara, who had come up silent behind Zyra and was standing 1 pace behind Zyra's shoulder with both his swords sheathed and his hands open at his sides like a man attending a funeral. Karma set his hand on the iron ring of the door. He pulled. The room beyond was a wreckage. Furniture had been thrown about it as if something heavy and strong had grown bored of it. A great wooden table lay overturned at the center, its legs in the air, its scarred underbelly facing them. The smell of dragon was no longer faint. It was the room. Over the edge of the table came, slowly, 1 set of claws, then the other, then the head. It was not large for a dragon. It was not yet large. It was bigger than a horse and smaller than a wagon, and its scales were the color of a dying fire, and it raised its narrow young head over the lip of the table and fixed its eyes on Karma in the doorway and curled its lip back from teeth and growled. Karma did not move. Behind him, Zyra had stopped breathing entirely. The vibration in her ribs had become the room. It was no longer like music. It was music. Slow, ancient, and unbearable. The dragon's eyes flicked from Karma's mask to Zyra's face beyond it, and the growl in its throat deepened. Behind them, in the deep corridors of the kobold castle, the alarm bell had finally stopped.
Lysgyntan yn y ffilmen gweithias bryn o'r gwrwyd tan awtor.
the treetops sway. Shadows glide through the silent air. Footsteps whisper on a hidden way, guided by a call only night can hear. Their eyes like embers in the forest deep, awake when the world has gone to sleep. Oh, they raise their voices to the full moon's glow, a haunting cry only wild hearts know, echoing softly through the ancient pine, a song of the night that's older than time. Oh, they run with the wind, fierce and bright, children of the silver night. Across cold stones and the river's gleam, they move as shadows without a sound, born of the dark, shaped from a dream, bound to the stars and the open ground. The forest listens when their chorus grows, a melody the midnight knows. Oh, they raise their voices to the full moon's glow, a haunting cry only wild hearts know, echoing softly through the ancient pine, a song of the night that's older than time. Where they run with the wind, fierce and bright, children of the silver night. No cage can hold them, and no light can tame. They burn with the wild and untamed flame. Through storm and shadow, their spirit stays, following the moon in its silver ways. Oh, they sing their truth to the sky so high, a song that trembles in the star-filled sky. Let their call guide you through the darkened wood, where the heart beats free as only